What is up, everybody? Welcome to another weekend roundup. So much to get to, both here in the United States and, of course, across Europe. Gonna try and go quickly because there's so much to cover. Starting in the Premier League, looked for a little bit there on at least Saturday morning like we were going to have another very dramatic weekend with some very interesting results and talking points. Didn't exactly end up that way. Manchester City down 2-0 to Crystal Palace. Then Erling Haaland happens and they win and end up winning fairly comfortably considering the circumstances. Don't have too much here other than to once again make this point, and I'm going to talk about it more when we get into the Champions League. But Erling Haaland just gives Manchester City a different solution, a different way to win, a different way to break teams down. When other stuff isn't working, he can, whether it's with his head, with his pace on the counter, his ability to find those little spaces and get himself open inside the box, he is something they didn't have the past couple seasons and have really never had as good of a player as Sergio Aguero was. Haaland is just a physical freak, unlike any player in the world. To me, this is more about Champions League than anything else, but you saw it over the weekend. It is another completely different issue you have to deal with when you are facing this team. And ultimately, Crystal Palace applaud the effort, couldn't hold on for 90 minutes. Manchester City get the win. Conor Gallagher gets sent off in the first half for Chelsea. And then Raheem Sterling scores not once but twice, and in between nearly finishes off a hat trick in about 15 minutes. Again, playing down a man. That is how bad Leicester City's defense was at the beginning of the second half. Leicester eventually get a goal back, nearly equalize, but Chelsea hold on for a 2-1 win they had absolutely no business getting. Raheem Sterling, really, really good little stretch of play there. I mean, there wasn't that much other than that. There were a couple chances for Chelsea here or there, but talk about endearing yourself to a fan base. They needed this win, and Raheem Sterling more or less got it for him by himself, along with some fairly good defense in Leicester's incompetence at this point. It's a mess Brendan Rodgers is trying to deal with, but credit to Chelsea. So again, that one looked like Leicester were going to get at least a point, if not all three, because of the first half red card to Conor Gallagher, but Chelsea end up also getting a win, of course. Liverpool didn't have any of these issues. 9-0 win over Bournemouth. Congratulations, Southampton. You're not alone in this struggle anymore. Don't have anything to say about Liverpool, really. I mean, the result speaks for itself. But from Bournemouth's perspective, as bad as this is, I would much rather take these beatings against the Arsenals and Liverpools of the world than do that weird thing that Norwich and Watford have done, where they somehow mess around and get these results against Liverpool and Manchester City, but can't beat anybody else. In terms of trying to stay up, I would much rather be in this situation where clearly they are just not anywhere near these teams. And nobody thought they would be. So that's not a huge deal, of course. You gotta fix the defensive problems here. But if you're looking for a bright spot in all of this and a okay start for Bournemouth that is slowly sort of coming undone, you've already faced Liverpool, you've already faced Arsenal, and you've done pretty well against the teams that aren't some of the best in the league and the most talented in the league. So I still think you have reason to be optimistic, as humiliating as 9-0 is. Arsenal also not part of this Saturday situation involving City and Chelsea, but Arsenal go down in that late game Saturday, but come back 2 goals to beat Fulham 2-1. I'm all in. I was before this game. They are the real deal. And especially if Manchester City would have dropped more points this week, it would have been a different conversation. Can they go toe-to-toe with City? I'm not convinced of that yet, but I am sold on this team making Champions League, this team being top 10, and potentially later with a couple more good performances, the way things are going for other teams, top 5 in the world. They're absolutely a top 10 team. They're a top 4 team in the Premier League. this is the season. If they do not make Champions League, it is a massive, massive disappointment. They got the financial backing, everything is clicking, and they got off to a really good start. They've been brilliant. Got to keep it up, but I'm sold that they're going to. Want to take a moment to talk about other things that happened in Europe, because as sort of ultimately predictable, strange way to get there, but fairly predictable, the results were in the Premier League. Not the case everywhere else. Bayern Munich once again have all kinds of trouble with Borussia Mönchengladbach. Gladbach did nothing offensively other than pouncing on the one mistake to get the goal. But it took a Leroy Sané goal very, very late for Bayern to even get a draw. Gladbach just has their number. I believe it's 4 straight games they've gone unbeaten against Bayern in all competitions. So here are your first points drop for Bayern. And once again, they look human. Same thing with PSG. Now, they nearly completed this comeback. Somehow the ball pinged off the post twice in that bizarre series of events you can go find on Twitter. But they draw Monaco at home. And really for both of these teams, if they had run these opponents off the field too, it's just kind of game over in terms of us learning anything about them domestically. It's a question of whether they win the Champions League or whether they don't. They're still both going to win their leagues. But this was sort of validation that they are vulnerable. You can actually play with them. They will not beat everybody 5, 6, 7, nothing. So both teams looked human over the weekend. It's 2 draws. I am not concerned in the slightest, but worth pointing out that Arsenal is still undefeated in the Premier League. Bayern Munich, PSG cannot say the same thing in their leagues. And then Serie A, Lazio, couple late goals to beat Inter 3-1. And Roma get outplayed at Juventus, but Tammy Abraham comes to the rescue to get a draw for Roma. So their perfect start to the season comes to an end, which leaves 3 teams in the main 5 leagues in Europe that are still perfect domestically. And we're, 3-4 weeks into the season at most. That is Arsenal, who I already talked about and mentioned, Real Madrid, and Real Betis. That's it. So for all of this, some of these leagues are guaranteed, predictable outcomes. Bayern, PSG winning, yeah, that's true. But we didn't even get to September without those teams dropping points. I think sometimes we fall into this lazy narrative and just think it's going to be a cakewalk and they just assume they win every week, and that's not the case. Bayern even more than PSG, but, PSG did not win Ligue 1 2 seasons ago. And so I just wanted to point this out, that you got 3 teams, 2 of them are from Spain and one of them is Real Betis. And the other is Arsenal, who haven't been in the Champions League in, over half a decade at this point. Worth pointing out and dwelling on for a moment there. Okay, MLS, this is where I want to spend most of my time in this video. Wild weekend, all kinds of huge games with playoff implications. But before we get to that, we have a supporter shield race. LAFC got handled by Austin, second time they lost to him this season. And meanwhile, the Philadelphia Union picked up another 6-0 victory, are just obliterating teams, and are now just 3 points back of LAFC. Now, the Union have played an extra game, but LAFC's schedule is a bunch of playoff teams. I believe it's 4 of their last 7 games are on the road. They have not been particularly great away from home, and they are not playing well at all. I would not be stunned if the Union pulled this off. And by the way, Austin's only 6 points back. I don't see them really becoming a factor in this. But if LAFC keep dropping points, they might just find a way to bring themselves into the conversation too. Just for so long it was, and I was absolutely of this mindset, that it was a foregone conclusion LAFC were going to win the Supporter Shield. And all of a sudden, here come the Union. LAFC are sort of falling apart at the wrong time. I'm not overly concerned yet, but you have to be well played going into the playoffs. This has to turn around quickly, or we're going to be having a different conversation. At least I will be having a different conversation heading into the postseason and when I'm thinking about who I'm picking for MLS Cup and that kind of thing. I already have my concerns about LAFC in the playoffs that have nothing to do with their current form. You add this on top of it, this is worth monitoring and worth being concerned about. It's not the end of the world. They can turn it around quickly. They're loaded with talent, obviously. But Steve Cherundolo needs to get this thing figured out pretty quickly, or maybe it doesn't cost him the Shield, but it certainly could cost him in the playoffs, and of course, that's what they're ultimately going for here. Okay, so then we got to address all of the refereeing controversies that happened this weekend. 3 primary ones. The first of which is not necessarily a refereeing controversy, other than the fact that it wasn't a red card initially and took VAR to intervene. What was Alejandro Pozuelo doing? He just karate kicked Andres Reyes. I mean, it was Nigel de Jong 2.0. How in the world that wasn't a red on the field, I don't know. But there was so many other refereeing controversies that was not even a conversation. Pozuelo, and I keep harping on this, going back to Luke Ayling's straight red for Leeds last season. And the same thing with Darwin Nunez for Liverpool a couple weeks ago. This is an Inter Miami team who also lost this game and is fighting for their playoff lives. They are nowhere near being secure of a playoff spot. And Pozuelo just got himself a straight red for no reason whatsoever. And he is one of the biggest reasons they've gone on this run lately. And I've actually bought this run, and they're not doing that weird thing where they play well for a while and then don't play well for a while. They've actually had a sustained period where they have played well. And Gonzalo Higuain scored a brilliant goal. They were up 1-0 in this game. Then the red card happened, and it all fell apart, and they lost to the Red Bulls. That one Pozuelo has to answer for. I've got nothing. No idea what he was thinking. That's the kind of mistake that could absolutely cost his team a playoff spot. On to refereeing controversy number 1, Columbus-Cincinnati. First of all, FC Cincinnati were excellent for most of this game, particularly in the first half. Brandon Vasquez had a massive chance to put them up 1-0, and uncharacteristically, he just whiffed on it. Not literally, he made contact with the ball, but I'm still not entirely sure how that didn't end up in the net. He just completely lost his composure. But to his credit, a few minutes later, he gets another more difficult chance, and he buries it to put FC Cincinnati up 1-0, a lead they wholeheartedly deserved. I was in the process of sending out a tweet saying Brandon Vasquez is having himself a rough half after that miss. And before I could even send it, he had scored. That was how quickly they responded and how quickly he was able to move on from that mistake. Big time props to him. Continue to say I want him in this next U.S. men's national team camp. Not sure he's on the plane yet, but absolutely he deserves that opportunity, so he gets another goal. And then we get to the controversy of the Derek Etienne equalizer, offside, not offside. First, we need to acknowledge this play is way closer than that screenshot that keeps going around makes it look. It simply is. Those can be deceiving, and you can't exactly see where everything is. You can go look at some of these offside analysis Twitter accounts that are even making the argument it might actually be onside. The other point I want to make here that I haven't really gotten to talk about too much in this space, if there is ever final proof of what I have believed since day one from VAR, that offside is not clear and obvious, and it is not black and white, this is it. This idea that you can use technology and quote-unquote get every single offside call right is simply false. Just like any other area of the game, there is going to be a gray area with it. And this is a perfect example. I still think he was offside. But now that we are actually embracing the definition of clear and obvious, I don't really have a problem with this not getting overturned. I understand why Pat Noonan's upset. The screen grab makes it look really bad. I get it. But if you really look geometrically at it and trust the people who do this all the time, they will tell you it is absolutely within the margin of error, at least from my perspective and how I interpret clear and obvious. If I'm Pat Noonan, my frustration with this, and my question is, did the assistant referee actually think Etienne was onside when the goal went in and that the goal was good? Very well, the answer might be yes. I don't know. But I ask that question because we've gotten into this spot with offside where we use VAR to make decisions rather than correct clear and obvious mistakes. And so now that we are actually transitioning into showing more leniency and not using VAR to re-referee games, that has to apply to offside too. Because part of me wonders, in a world where we have not been telling referees for multiple seasons now to keep your flags down and to not put them up unless it's obvious and let the play go and sort of let VAR handle it, maybe that flag goes up. Again, I don't know. This is a hypothetical point I am making as a larger commentary that may or may not apply to this situation. And if that flag goes up, there is no way in the world that is getting overturned. To me, this is how VAR should work. It was a really close call, so you go with what's on the field. But you actually have to let the AR make that decision on the field. And that's the part of this I don't know. I'm not sure if we're there yet because we're just transitioning sort of our approach to VAR. That is the next step, is making sure you actually let ARs and referees in general, but ARs in particular because of the situation, make that call. If we're going to use their calls as the base and say it has to actually be a clear and obvious mistake, then they need to be allowed to make that call and not sort of give it to VAR and let VAR use technology to figure out offside. That would be my frustration if I'm Pat Noonan, and at least the question I would want to ask. Maybe there's nothing in it. Maybe in another world where we haven't spent multiple seasons training these refs, that flag goes up and Cincinnati get a win. Matt Miazga puts them right back in front. Columbus scores with almost the last kick of the game to make it 2-2. Huge result for Columbus. Disappointing for Cincinnati. The explanation that was given was they didn't think it was a clear and obvious error. Ultimately, I'm okay with it. The call I am not okay with is the penalty the Portland Timbers got to equalize against Seattle. Now, Portland went on and won the game thanks to Sebastian Blanco. The Sounders couldn't connect a pass to save their lives in the first half. It was shocking how poor they were, particularly in midfield, which is understandable considering Christian Roldan wasn't there, João Paulo wasn't there. They are depleted in the midfield. But just all over the place, they could not connect passes and get any kind of rhythm. But they do go up early on a set piece and are about to get into halftime, and Eric Williamson goes down in the box for what I would generously call an incredibly soft penalty. I am a stickler for actually saying clear and obvious error. I don't want VAR re-refereeing games. But my goodness, that was not a penalty. I would have overturned that. And that's saying something. Because I am resistant to overturn things unless my sort of criteria basically is, if I'm that referee, do I want that call back? Do I want the opportunity to redo that and say, I made a mistake and I want to make this right? And my answer in that case would be yes, that was a mistake that needs to be fixed. So you've got two rivalry games with teams fighting for their playoff lives. at least controversial, if not flat out missed calls. Depending on your interpretation, your opinion of Cincinnati, your opinion of the PK that the Timbers got. But both of those goals ended up switching the points that were awarded in this game. If you're MLS, you have to be desperately hoping that playoff spots are not decided by the point Columbus got and the 2 points the Timbers got. Or, the 2 points the Timbers got. I did that math right. Because of these decisions. Because it was not a good week for MLS refereeing. I have changed my tune a little bit on the offside, the Etienne offside for Columbus. Originally, I thought that was just a flat-out blown call. Did some more research, did some more reading. I'm okay with it at this point. But you don't need that headache if you're MLS. You don't need referees in the spotlight. They certainly put themselves in the spotlight this weekend. And it may have massive consequences come decision day and sorting out those final playoff spots in both conferences. Other thing I want to mention before we get out of here real quick, thanks for sticking around. I know this is a long video. Kris Ward was let go by the Washington Spirit early this week, but it's taken a little bit to kind of get the full story to come out, and I want to address it here. He spoke to The Athletic after being dismissed for what the club basically called a incident at training, didn't elaborate on. Kris Ward talked to The Athletic, presented his version of events, which was basically, I behaved in a way that I regret, but I never belittled, disrespected, verbally abused players. I wish I could have done things differently. But he presented it, and there's certainly an understandable interpretation of these events, sort of based on the context and what Kris Ward told The Athletic, that is basically, this team hasn't won since the opening game of the season. Clearly there was some internal tension. So, frustrations boil over. He says and does some things he shouldn't have. And the club look at it and go, we don't need that. It's not going well on the field. We don't need to add this additional turmoil to it. It's time to get a fresh voice in there. But then the Washington Spirit players released a statement after their game this weekend, basically calling Kris Ward a liar. Didn't use that exact language, but said his version of events, what he told The Athletic, they view as inaccurate. Which immediately reshaped my thoughts on this. Of course, the whole point here is to just continue to gather information, so it's not like I had a set-in-stone opinion. But there was a version of events I would buy that I just laid out where it just wasn't working. Emotions got the best of everybody, and it was best to go separate ways. But when a statement that is made with the support of the entire team comes out, blatantly disputing what Kris Ward told The Athletic, in the NWSL today, with the way coaches have behaved, fair or not to Kris Ward, I will not give an NWSL coach the benefit of the doubt when their players are so strongly presenting a different story. To me, it is that simple. NWSL coaches have lost the benefit of the doubt as a collective because of the horrific behavior of some of them. Of course, not all of them. But as soon as I see a team collectively say, we don't buy that, we don't agree with that, we consider that inaccurate and false and misleading and not a true representation of how we feel and what we saw happen on that field with whatever this training incident was, I immediately and going to go to bat for the players. I don't know what happened. I'm not necessarily, and this is much, I'm speaking in terms of the court of public opinion. Of course, there's a whole long way to go in this investigation. We need to get to the bottom of what happened. But when you have a team come out and say what the Spirit team said, and you combine that with the recent track record of behavior of coaches in this league, you are going to have to prove to me that somehow this entire group of players, who probably, at least most of them, must have seen what happened, are presenting a false narrative. The burden of proof is on you as a coach, in my mind, in terms of court of public opinion. Of course, if you're talking legal, if it comes to that, hopefully it doesn't. Completely different story. But wanted to address this because this whole benefit of the doubt concept when it comes to the behavior of coaches is incredibly important to me. And this is a perfect way to highlight it. And collectively, as a soccer culture and a soccer community, we have to go to bat for these NWSL players. When they speak out and say, what happened was not okay, the way this behavior starts changing, the way the culture inside the league starts changing, is listening to players and doing something about it. Players have given absolutely no reason for you to doubt them. Coaches have given, you collectively, us as a soccer community, reason after reason after reason to doubt them. I don't know Kris Ward's intentions. Maybe Kris Ward genuinely didn't think he had crossed the line. That conversation is important if you're talking about Kris Ward's future as a coach and sort of what happens next. But in terms of the Washington Spirit and this event, it doesn't really matter. If the players say what happened was not okay, then what happened was not okay unless I have reason to believe otherwise. Feel free to go read more. You can read what Kris Ward said in The Athletic. The statement from the players that was part of their post-game press conference is all over social media as well. I encourage you to actually go read those to get the full sort of spectrum of what is going on here. But I wanted to address that as well. That is all for the weekly roundup. Again, I know it's a long video. Thank you so much for sticking with it and tuning in. Just wanted to cover everything. There's so much going on with the start to the European seasons as we ramp up for Champions League here. Champions League group stage, I should say. MLS is coming down the stretch. NWSL coming down the stretch. There was just a lot to get to. Wanted to cover as much as possible, as quickly as possible. So thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you next time.